BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. Hello everybody, today is Friday, and on Fridays this year I've normally been doing Zodiac killer interviews and releasing them for you, but this week I was unable to provide you guys with interviews not only for the Friday show but also for the Tuesday show. However, they will return next week, and in this episode I wanted to talk to you about the Zodiac killer symbol, and specifically tying it to the costume that was worn by the Zodiac at Lake Berryessa. On September 27th of 1969, the Zodiac killer attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa in Northern California. He didn't talk about it a lot in the letters. There is a line in one of the Zodiac killer's letters that said he did in 2 kids in the North Bay area, and some people think that refers to the Lake Berryessa stabbing. But the Zodiac did take credit for it by writing a message on Brian Hartnell's car door that had the Zodiac symbol, the word Vallejo, the dates of Zodiac activity, and then by knife. And the Zodiac also made a phone call 1 hour and 10 minutes after the stabbing took place, and he took credit for the crime there as well. So most people believe that the Zodiac committed this crime. There are some people out there who have their doubts, and my own interpretation of the events was he's already proven to law enforcement and the media that he has committed the crime with the message on the door and the phone call. Therefore, he doesn't need to brag about it in the letters or say, here are some facts that only I and the police know, or to cut off a piece of the victim's shirt and take it with him and mail that in with other letters the way that he did with the murder of Paul Stein, because he's already established that he was the killer. But I have to give a shout out to longtime BBOR listener Batman66, who recommended the movie Shock Corridor to me. It is on YouTube for free. Shock Corridor was made in 1963, and it features a character who wears a hooded costume that is rather similar to the one that was worn by the Zodiac at Lake Berryessa. It not only does it have a hood that completely covers the Zodiac's face, but there's a symbol that comes down over the chest, and it has a circle with a cross going through it. And what the character is doing in the movie Shock Corridor is, he says that it is a Ku Klux Klan hood. He is very clear about that. And he says that the symbol is the cyclos. It comes from the Greek kuklos, and it is the circle or the wheel, and it is used to make someone invisible to their enemies. This is something that has been talked about before with the Zodiac. There is a documentary out there called Maniac and the Mask. It's more like a TV special rather than a more formal documentary, and it is available on Tom Voigt's YouTube channel, Zodiac Killer Official, and they say that a similar cross was used by Aleister Crowley as well to make his followers invisible to their enemies, although I haven't found an exact source that would corroborate that. But the Ku Klux Klan was very big on invisibility. I would cite the historian Allison Kinney, who talked about how prior to 1915, the Klan didn't always wear those type of robes that we associate them with the white conical hood and the face coverings. That was something that really became commonplace for the Klan after the movie Birth of a Nation, the D.W. Griffith film, and that was when there was a more, uniform nature to the Klan that was adopted. But prior to 1915, there was just the plan to turn the Klan into the invisible empire. That's the word that gets talked about, or the term that gets used when they're talking about the Klan from the 1800s. And she also told one story of how somebody was even caught and embarrassed because their neighbors recognized the man wearing his wife's dress when he was going out for one of these Klan events. People wore all types of different costumes and clothing and disguises. It was simply about disguising oneself so they couldn't be recognized. Therefore, it was like being the invisible empire. It's metaphorical, of course, but wearing a disguise so people don't recognize them because of the actions they're doing. Now, that's what was talked about in the movie, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers about Shock Corridor, but that's a very minor part of it. Shock Corridor is a film made in 1963 about a journalist who is pretending to be insane so he can infiltrate a mental institution, and there's a story that he wants to write about it. And I just have a challenge question for you. Can you think of a Zodiac killer suspect that might be the type to get arrested on purpose for a journalistic project? Can you think of one? Easy challenge question, I know, but I digress from that. And by the way, if you do watch Shock Corridor, the first 40 minutes of it are actually a little bit slow, but really about the 35-40 minute mark, I got pulled in. I was like, oh my goodness, I want to see what happens. As I said, it's on YouTube for free. And I decided to read more about this Cyclos and Kuklos. And Kuklos is actually a term that is used in mysticism, tying back to Greek mythology, and specifically the Kuklos Anankis. I'm actually going to read a section here from Glorian.org that will discuss the Kuklos Anankis. Kuklos Anankis, sometimes written as Kuklos Anankis, is a Greek term. Kuklos is Greek for a circle or wheel. Ananki comes from the ancient Greek word and Ananki, and it is a goddess representing destiny, necessity, and fate. Think about it. Destiny, necessity, and fate. Thus, the Kuklos Anankis is a circle or wheel of destiny, necessity, and fate, which can represent the journey of the disembodied entity to a temporary experience of happiness and back to Earth. At times it was symbolized by serpent mounts swallowing their own tails, and other times it was resembled by a dragon, all of which denote the cycle of time, among other things visible in the subterranean crypts of Thebes. Okay, that goes on to some other stuff here, and one more time, that was from Glorian.org. Now just think about that, why someone would wear this on their chest, trying to be invisible to their enemies, metaphorically speaking, trying to experience temporary ecstasy and joy. The Zodiac Killer talked all about this. He said that to kill was the most thrilling experience. It's even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. And I absolutely do think that the Zodiac Killer watched the movie Shock Corridor, and I think that this just is another example of an influence on the Zodiac's creation of his persona. But I don't think that it was necessarily an extremely complicated challenge for someone to look at all these different influences, like the story Sign Z by Edwin Baird that has a character named Z. There's a serial killer named Z that murders people and says, "This is Z calling." And then Charlie Chan at Treasure Island has the serial killer named Dr. Zodiac, who sends in messages. I think all of these things were an influence on the creation of the Zodiac Killer. Some of them conscious, some of them unconscious, but someone just watched movies and read books and they remembered the stuff. It would be very easy for them to do. So I don't think this would require a lot of memorization on the part of the person. I mean, the same way that you might remember a book that you read when you were a kid. And I would also like to go over to the Wikipedia page for Ananke just to get some basic facts. In ancient Greece, Ananke comes from the common noun meaning force, constraint, or necessity. It is the personification of inevitability, compulsion, and necessity. She is customarily depicted as holding a spindle, one of the Greek primordial deities, the birth of Ananke, and her brother and consort, Kronos, the personification of time, and were thought to mark the division between the eon of chaos and the beginning of the cosmos. Alright, think about that here. Chronos, time. Zodiac is a brand of wristwatch, and I really do think that this is what's going on, that there's this type of mythological influence on the Zodiac Killer, that he is actually playing the part of Chronos. And why do I say that? Well, in the next material here. Ananke is considered the most powerful dictator of fate and circumstance. Mortals and gods alike respected her power and paid her homage. Sometimes she is considered the mother of fate. She is thought to be the only one influencing their decisions. And according to some sources, except Zeus, I think that means that she is very powerful, but Zeus can also be more powerful in Greek mythology. And I want to digress from that because the more important point here, I think, is Ananke is considered to be the powerful dictator of fate and circumstance. Now, back to the Lake Berryessa stabbing. The Zodiac wrote those words on Brian Hartnell's car door and signed it by knife at the end. Then the Zodiac Killer would mail in the Halloween card on October 27th of 1970, and the Halloween card had the words by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. To give credit to Tahoe 27, she's the one who found that is on the cover of a Tim Holt comic book that says by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, and it is the Death Wheel. It's sometimes also written as the Wheel of Death. It's being spun by Lady Doom. Lady Doom seems like she is very similar to Ananke in this situation. I mean, all about fate, circumstance, force, constraint. I mean, all of those things I think are tied in. And Lady Doom is actually a larger literary character called Lady of Situations. These things get used time and time again. Tim Holt wasn't the first first place to talk about, the Lady of Situations. So I think that this is something that the Zodiac is actually doing. I believe the Zodiac was playing the part of Kronos, and I'm not sure how conscious the influence was. As I said, I mean, it would be the same way if you just read some books and then you had to write your own story or something. You might borrow a few ideas here and there, and some of them you might not even remember where they came from. You might even think it's your own original idea, but oh yeah, it's actually from a book you read 20 years ago or something like that. But with the Zodiac Killer, that does appear to be what he's doing, because the Zodiac, as I said, is the brand of wristwatch, and I think Drew Beeson is spot on when he said that's like the biggest reason why he took the name Zodiac, and the circle with the cross going through it is also on the wristwatches, and that's where you see the word Zodiac and the cross circle together. The Zodiac would mostly just write his name at the top of the letter. This is the Zodiac speaking, and then he would sign the letters with a cross circle, the cross circle sign off. One thing that I've thought about with this theory that gets way too speculative for me to endorse, even though this is something that came to mind when I was reading about this stuff, is a lot of people have looked at how there could have been a female participant in the Zodiac creation, that there's a woman who is doing a lot of the planning and a man is carrying out the actions. As I said, Ananke and Kronos. I mean, Lady Doom and the Red Mask character. Well, the Red Mask is the victim in that one, but Lady Doom is the female who is spinning the wheel. And this has been talked about by Ray Grant, of course. He believes that Berta Margulies, a woman, was the chief orchestrator of what he calls the Zodiac Killer Project. And a simpler theory is that Don and Betty Hardin planned this together. Don Hardin was the Zodiac, and Betty Hardin, his wife, was involved with the planning process. But as for any type of observation like that, I just don't know if we have enough evidence to support something like that, but I definitely think that the Zodiac would have been familiar with these types of mythological stories, just because it's matching up so neatly to a lot of the things that the Zodiac would mail in his correspondences. And Ananke is mentioned in a very famous poem by Wallace Stevens. I shouldn't say that. I mean, I was reading online and says perhaps one of the most famous literary creations, or one of the most famous poems to discuss Ananke. It's called Like Decorations in a Cemetery by Wallace Stevens, and I'm saying that only because I found out about it only recently, and I'm going to read some of it for you and see if this could also be a type of influence on the Zodiac. In the far south, the sun of autumn is passing, like Walt Whitman walking along a ruddy shore. He is singing and chanting the things that are a part of him, the worlds that were and will be, death and day. Nothing is final, he chants. No man shall see the end. His beard is of fire, and his staff is of a leaping flame. And sigh for me, night wind, in the noisy leaves of the oak. I am tired. Sleep for me, heaven over the hill. Shout for me, loudly, joyful sun, when you rise. It was when the trees were leafless first in November, and their blackness became apparent, that one first knew the eccentric to be the base of design. This poem's 11 pages long, so I'm going to jump ahead to the parts that I think would be most Zodiac related. We should die, except for death, in his chalk and violet robes, not to die, a perish death. How easily feelings flow this afternoon over the simplest words. It is too cold for work now in the fields. The sense of serpent in you, Ananke, and your averted stride, add nothing to the horror of the frost that glistens on your face and hair. And I just have to stop right there for a second, because as I said, there are lots of things that the Zodiac might have read that influenced him, and I'm just sharing with you the thought process that I had. I was like, okay, there have been a female participant in the Zodiac mystery? Maybe, but when I read that poem, I was saying, let's say hypothetically the Zodiac was familiar with all of these sources, then was the female persona just like his imaginary creation, like something that's just part of his imagination? Maybe there isn't actually a physical, three-dimensional woman that would be involved with the planning process. This could be something that was all created in his own mind. That's just what came to mind for me. Music is not yet written, but it is to be. The preparation is long and of long intent, for the time when sound shall be subtler than we ourselves. It needed the heavy nights of drenching weather to make him return to people, to find among them, whatever it was he found in their absence, a pleasure, an indulgence, and an infatuation. Union of the weakest developed strength, not wisdom. Can all men together avenge one of the leaves that have fallen in autumn? But the wise man avenges by building his city in snow. One more time, that was the poem Light Decorations in a Cemetery by Wallace Stevens. Now, again, if we're entertaining the possibility that the Zodiac Killer would have been familiar with these concepts from Greek mythology, the Kuklos, Ananke, Kronos, as well as perhaps even being familiar with this poem, I think this sounds extremely, extremely Zodiac related, where I even began to think, could there have been a reason why the Zodiac committed his first crime on December 20th of 1968, right before the winter solstice, when it talks about it needed the heavy nights of drenching weather to make him return to the people, to find among them, and I mean, it's talking all about how he wants to wait until the winter, the leaves that have fallen in autumn, but the wise man avenges by building his city in snow, and even just saying something about how he has to wait throughout the winter and then starting again in the summertime. He's also saying that it was when the trees were leafless first in November and their blackness became apparent, and the Zodiac committed his final confirmed crime in October, the murder of Paul Stein. I mean, was this all something that was just planned and calculated, and these all had specific meanings to him? And I think at the very least that's a possible explanation as to why the Zodiac Killer chose the dates of activities, and it could very well be that the Zodiac was doing them somewhat by chance, almost, if he has his imaginary girlfriend spinning the death wheel, which means he would have done it himself, but maybe things were chosen, like the dates were chosen, and the methods were chosen just because of some type of chance system that he was using, spinning a wheel on his own, or just picking a date out of the calendar at random. That would definitely confuse people, and still has to this year, because the Zodiac committed crimes on December 20th of 1968, July 4th of 1969, September 27th of 1969, and October 11th of that year as well. And people don't really see a very strong reason why he would have chosen those dates. Now, one explanation is just they're on mostly evenings, weekends, or holidays, and this is just somebody who had a chance to get away unnoticed. It was done purely for practicality. And then Mike Rodelli, author of In the Shadow of Mount Diablo, talks about his Zodiac suspect, Shel Cavalli, saying it matches up to the birth dates and the death dates of Shel Cavalli's parents. Shel Cavalli's mother died on December 20th, and his father was born on September 27th. There could be personal family reasons why the Zodiac Killer chose these dates. I personally like my observation the most about how that 12/20/68 adds up to 100. That's Lake Herman Road. And then at Blue Rock Springs, you have 7/4/69. 7 plus 4 is 11 plus 69. That adds up to 80. Paul Stein was murdered on October 11th of 1969. 10/11/69. That adds up to 90. And the only one that is off is Lake Berryessa, but giving credit to Wildfire99, who pointed out that the Zodiac didn't write 9/27/69 on the car door at Lake Berryessa. He wrote Set, S-E-P-T, and might be pronounced sept in English, but set is the French word for 7. It's the French number 7. Now, I mean, that might sound like a bit of a stretch, but if you then add up all the numbers that were written out, that totals to 40. And I was like, well, I've tried so hard to find some type of mathematical way to make all of this work and reconcile everything, but that might just be a coincidence, I'm forced to admit. And I've also thought about think about this concept of, this is back in the hypothetical of the Zodiac playing the part of Kronos, and he wants to begin in December, and then he wants to stay dormant for the winter and restart in the summertime. Then he starts on the date that adds up to 100, and then 80, then 90. It's almost as if he's trying to get back to 100, and he has to do it before November, and it mathematically works out. And then perhaps the Lady of Situations, Lady Doom, would just have chosen one date on the calendar, and as I said, that would be the Zodiac's just kind of game that he is playing. He would have chosen it himself, of course. One date was chosen at random, and then he fudged the number so it came out to an even number. I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Does that just sound too weird to you? I would not endorse that theory. It's just a possibility. But the stuff that I do think is very solid is I believe that the Zodiac chose this symbol to represent time. I believe he chose it because he wanted figuratively be invisible to his enemies, the way it was discussed in Shock Corridor, and I also believe the Zodiac was inspired by Greek mythology. What do you guys think? Please feel free to put your ideas in the comment section down below. Short episode, I just wanted to share some observations with you. And anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram. And I'll see you over there. Goodbye.